Welcome to the 7th episode of the Impact Principles webinar series. I'm Diane Damskey, Head of Secretariat of the Operating Principles for Impact Management. Today's webinar topic is Impact Assessment, Challenges, and Best Practices. And I'm delighted to have with us 4 incredible panelists representing 4 signatories to the Impact Principles. We have Marc Moser, Head of Impact at Lightrock, Alessandro Maffioli, Chief of the Development Effectiveness Division at IDB Invest, Nadina Stodiek, Impact Manager at BlueOrchard Finance, and Kristin Sadler, Manager, Platform and Impact at Quona Capital. Welcome to all of you. Now, impact assessment is a topic that is of great interest to all signatories and, frankly, all impact investors. And with the continuing growth and development of the impact investing market, we are starting to see some best practices emerge in impact assessment. Now, there's a great diversity among impact investors, all sizes and types. However, certain aspects of impact assessment are relevant to everyone. So these 4 panelists in their disclosure statements provided a great amount of detail about their impact assessment framework and methodology. So the goal of this webinar is to have each of them tell us about their frameworks, how did they develop them, where they found some challenges in the process, and also how they expect them to evolve over time as they continue to grow their impact assets under management. The format will be each of the panelists will have time to present their frameworks, and then we're going to have an interactive discussion amongst all the panelists. And out of this, we really hope to provide you with some best practices that you can apply to your impact assessment frameworks. And with that, I'm going to turn first to Marc from Lightrock. So Marc, Lightrock has developed proprietary impact assessment tools, which you described in detail in your disclosure statement. You mentioned that these have been developed over more than a decade and that they continue to evolve. So can you highlight what are the key tools you use for impact assessment? Where are you today, and how do you expect these to evolve over time? Marc?
Sure, thank you, Diane, for initiating this dedicated session on impact assessment and inviting us to present our approach. So just briefly on Lightrock, we're a global private equity impact investing platform with a team of about 70 colleagues based on 4 continents, including the regions basically where we invest in Europe, LATAM, India, and Africa. We currently manage a portfolio of over 60 mostly growth and expansion stage companies representing more than $1 billion in assets. We're affiliated with and backed by LGT and the princely House of Liechtenstein. So some might remember us actually under our previous names, LGT Impact or LGT Lightstone. The origin and historic evolution of our platform explains to a certain extent what our impact assessment approach looks like still today and how it developed over the years. So a few years ago, we spun off LGT Venture Philanthropy, a charitable foundation founded already in 2007 with philanthropic mission to very professionally deploy capital in the most impactful way across several types of organizations, financing, geographies, as well as themes or sectors, right? So more than 10 years ago, we started to test, customize, and apply in a more standardized manner supportive concepts to assess impact, stemming mostly or more from the world of development foundations and institutions, like, for example, the theory of change concept or model, which is well known today and accepted among impact investors, but also, for example, the Kellogg Foundation's logic model, which are still key actually today, key elements of our tools. At the heart of our impact assessment is clearly our pre-investment tool, which is basically an impact due diligence tool that allows us or our investment teams to gradually develop a very deep understanding of a company's existing and future impact potential and build the related investment case explicitly from an impact angle. And the purpose of building the impact case and the key findings derived from the assessment is twofold. First, it informs our investment committee in the pre-investment process, allowing them to make informed decisions on investment opportunities. And secondly, although this is the impact assessment is as such a one-off activity, it needs to be seen in a more dynamic and procedural sense, as it provides the basis for everything on impact measurement and management that follows after then during the holding period, be it impact value creation activities and support, impact performance measurement and the monitoring, as well as reporting, and even kind of into re-evaluation and drawing lessons learned from these conclusions. Our tool consists of two complementary parts, as shown here on this slide: the impact scorecard and the impact model, which both equally lean on proven methods such as a theory of change and logic model, and emerging standards, including the IMP and IRIS+, for example. The impact scorecard, on the one hand, is a comprehensive qualitative questionnaire with an underlying scoring methodology. It allows our investment teams to conduct a thorough analysis of a company's impact performance and impact potential based on a set of relevant variables, covering basically the generally accepted, but also some more maybe customized relevant dimensions and criteria of impact and the associated risk factors. The logic we apply here is that the company has at the given point in time a certain potential to create positive impact through its core operation as it grows. And this magnitude or the scale of this potential can be assessed by investigating several factors around the business model, management capabilities, the type of impact, including the targeted stakeholders, scalability, depth and duration, and so on. And these factors in aggregate determine the potential maximum impact that the company may be able to create when continuing to grow and perform as expected. The impact potential section of our scorecard is therefore structured into 6 broad dimensions that are investigated by means of 22 underlying questions. In reality, however, as we know, there are several risks that a company will not be able to seize its full growth and impact potential, or that positive impacts may be offset to a certain extent by negative or unintended ones. And these factors are summarized in our case and assessed under the impact risk section of the scorecard, categorized in 4 broad dimensions and investigated by 12 related questions. When completed, the scorecard automatically generates a net or a risk-adjusted impact potential score, which should enable the IC and other internal or external stakeholders to quickly get a directional sense of an investment's impact attractiveness, as we see it at the time of investing. And it's important that the score should not serve as a standalone decision-making criteria, which is why we always also provide more analytics in the form of an impact profile and spider charts, for example, showing the detailed scores on the level of those 10 dimensions for deeper interpretation. And the actual key output from the impact scorecard is that the findings are translated into proposed value creation actions and activities of how the company could optimize its impact in our view and how it can support that. The second building block here on the right-hand side of our impact assessment is the impact model, a complementary analytical tool to help investment managers in developing and articulating the impact rationale or narrative behind each investment, including the strategic fit, the expected impact outcome, the company-specific problem, solution context, the theory of change as well. On a company level, the existing evidence on the size of the challenge addressed and the effectiveness or expected effectiveness of the specific business solution. And what we're able to derive from this analysis, besides additional value creation opportunities, is the definition of relevant impact KPIs and targets to facilitate robust monitoring and reporting of the company's impact performance after investing. We regularly review our tool on a formal as well as more informal and ad hoc basis, depending on the need. We do this with a wider group of investment team and senior leadership representatives internally to evaluate the suitability and the validity of the tool, receiving direct feedback on its application from the investment teams is crucial in this context, and happening in our case on an ongoing basis. I think the main trigger for continuously further developing and also changing to a certain extent our impact assessment in the past, as well as what we foresee going forward, is adaptation and customization alongside our evolving strategy and investment focus. We are constantly also exploring new sectors and themes, maybe new geographies as well, which might require minor or more substantial tweaks to some parts of the tool. But also in some of the more traditional or mature impact themes that we have invested in for a long time, we are considering potentially moving away from currently using one and the same general tool for assessing impact for all our investment opportunities to having more specific and customized versions for certain portfolios or themes, accounting better or more for some of these particularities of these themes and the specific emerging standards in assessing impact. For example, for climate-related investments or for investments in the area of financial inclusion. So that's just as a quick introduction and overview of our impact assessment approach. Handing back to you, Diane.
Thank you so much, Marc. That was very, very detailed and very helpful to start off this discussion. So let me turn next to Alessandro. Alessandro, as an MDB or multilateral development bank focused on the private sector, IDB Invest has been integrating impact and financial considerations into its investments for a very long time. Tell us about your approach and what you had to consider in developing your impact management framework and the Delta impact rating system. What are a few of the main features? So Alessandro?
Thank you very much, Diane. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to be part of this outstanding panel and to talk a little bit about our approach. So the first feature I would highlight of our approach is the concept of end-to-end. So our impact management framework is an end-to-end series of tools and practices that support the complete operational life cycle, and in a way allow us to integrate, as you said, impact consideration, financial consideration, the way we make decision on what to invest and the way we manage our portfolio. So if you want, in short, it is a tool that allows us to build, measure, and manage a portfolio of financially sustainable investments through which we want to achieve our development mandate, our development mission, and I would say ultimately the contribution to the SDGs, which is something that we track and measure within our framework. So the tools and practices included in our framework allow us to first select the right operations and the right clients. So first, in the origination process, how do we steer the origination process towards the clients and transactions we want to see in our portfolio? Second, assess the potential impact of each transaction and design operation for results. This is also important for us. Design for results means that things can be measured afterwards, what we call evaluability internally. Third, monitor, measure, manage, and evaluate the portfolio impact as the impact of each one of the transactions that are in our portfolio. And through this, generate knowledge and share knowledge and apply this operational learning to the way we select and structure transactions. So if you want, you can see this also. This is why we like very much the representing this as a wheel, as a sort of continuous improvement approach, where we, through our operation experience, we learn and we try to improve the way we operate. A second feature that I like to write, and I promise I'm going to go into a little bit more detail also of the tools, is the portfolio approach. If you can go to the next slide. This is something which is grounded in our approach, our impact management framework, and it's the way we see needed to steer the decision-making process into integrating financial consideration and impact consideration. What does it mean? Concretely, it means that every single transaction that enters in our portfolio and go through our decision-making process, whether in investing or not, is rated both from the impact point of view, so through our delta impact rating system, and from the financial contribution point of view, so how much contributes to our financial sustainability. Then we plot and we look at the transaction, these two dimensions. We have also other dimension of strategic priority, but into these two basic dimensions, and see how they fit in our portfolio, and see how they fit in both our development appetite and in our need to be financially sustainable. This is something that we take very seriously. There are hard threshold that determine the eligibility of a transaction. And what the graph here starts to represent is that at a higher level of financial contribution, that will allow transaction to have maybe a little bit more moderate impact rating. And whereas at a lower level of financial contribution, or if you want the other way around, you could expect a high risk in terms of impact will maybe carry less contribution from the financial sustainability. So we try to manage our portfolio in this set of possibilities. Of course, there are good news that there are many transactions that are good both from the point of view of the impact and the sustainability contribution. So this is something that we use in our framework, and is another basic characteristic of what we do, and it's very helpful in the way we manage our investment committee in defining how we're making decision on what to invest or not, and the way we communicate to our shareholders. Now, a little bit more on our delta impact rating system. I won't enter into detail. We have a publication that we share. Maybe we can still in the previous one still. Here, I will highlight three main features we were looking for when we redesigned in 2016, when the organization was restructured, and we revamped an impact rating system we already had for, I would say, 15 years. And there were three characteristics we were looking at. First, something that has to be rigorous. So our delta impact rating system is based on the idea of approximating economic and social rate of return to the society of the transaction. So we look at the benefits and cost to the society, including systemic effect of the investment we're looking at. This also includes a detailed analysis of the beneficiary and stakeholder involved, and to see who is benefiting from what, and also who's carrying the cost potential of the transaction, how we minimize this cost. Being in a let's say economic social return estimate, it includes a counterfactual analysis, a continuous asking ourselves what would have been the situation without the investment, and a risk assessment that is embedded into this analysis, where we also carry a sensitivity analysis, seeing what would happen to the impact of the transaction depending on certain variables which we have control on. All this is then complemented by a sustainability assessment and an additionality assessment, where we ask ourselves how we are additional to the transaction, what we're bringing that let's say the market alone will not bring. The second characteristic of the tool was to be operational. The Delta is a practical, fact-based, database, hands-on tool that provides a standardized way to look at transaction. I always make this joke. I'm an economist in the background. You give me infinite time, infinite resources. I will give you the perfect analysis of the impact of what I would think, the perfect analysis, what is the impact of the transaction. Of course, we don't have that time. We have to operate as an investment bank, a development investment bank. So we need to produce this rating in a reasonable time and under a reasonable operational cost. And also we want something that is standardized, so that is predictable internally, because we found that something we need in terms of carrying out the conversation with investment officer, risk officer, and the development effectiveness specialist in a efficient way, is that everybody understands how the transaction is rated for its potential impact. You can look for more detail on that in the publication again. And the third feature of the tool we're looking at is consistent and comparable. We at IDB Invest, we manage a quite heterogeneous portfolio. We go for many sectors. We invest in many sectors, from infrastructure to corporate to financial intermediaries. And so we wanted something that has a common architecture, so that allows to produce a rating between 0 and 100, or 0 and 10, we always use a decimal, that we can in a way compare in the overall management of our portfolio, respond to the question, does this fit with our development appetite or not? How does it position? But we also understand that the strong comparability comes when you look at the transaction compared to transaction in the same sector, segment, and maybe country. Now, let me close here with another feature of the system within this very important, if you can go to the next slide, is the idea to move from impact assessment and analysis to impact management. This is why Marc was mentioning that as well. Every year we reassess all the transactions based on the information we collect from our clients or the indicators we're monitoring, and we reassess, we recalculate the impact rating score, updated with what is actually happening. And we compare this, what these graphs show that in the vertical axis, we have the delta rating calculated at the year of supervision, and the horizontal axis, the deviation from what was the prediction at entry and what is we observe during the execution of the investment by our client. This is extremely important for us because allow us to detect in a very short period of time, even though our operational maturity, we evaluate everything as a wrap up. What are the transactions that are on track and which one are the ones that are going off track? And this allows two things. First, manage our portfolio so we can be in contact with our clients. Last year, we made a very interesting exercise based on this model and this information. We actually performed a stress test to COVID in terms of the impact of our portfolio, where we were projecting or thinking that the portfolio would have gone based on the impact we can try to predict on what COVID would have affected. And manage with our clients, be in contact with them. We share with them a dashboard where we show them how the transaction is going in terms of impact and how it compares to our portfolio. And we try to work with them on the difficulties they may face. And also learning, shorten the learning cycle, not wait to get into operational maturity to say this was successful or not, but looking also how transactions are evolving in our portfolio and try to understand what works, what doesn't work, and what can be done better with a client or future client or repeated client whenever they come back to us and we can look at their transaction. So that is another important feature for us, moving from, let's say, assessment to really impact management. And I will stop here and thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. And I think on the next slide, it's showing the publication in which you can find this. And we've also posted this on the impactprinciples.org website in the resources section under publications. So feel free to look at this, and this is a wonderful resource for all impact investors. Now, next I'd like to go to Nadina. BlueOrchard has recently added to the list of strategies that align with the impact principles. So I'd like you to tell us about your B Impact framework and how you developed it. And also, how did you make sure that material factors across different industries and asset classes were incorporated into the system? Nadina?
Thank you, Diane, also for the opportunity to talk a bit about our work in the context of this panel. So maybe a few words quickly on BlueOrchard, just to give some background. So we are an asset manager in impact investing, active since more than 20 years. And as you already mentioned, we have several asset classes. So we have products currently in private equity, in private debt or credit, in bonds, so public assets as well. And we are about to launch a sustainable infrastructure product. So really different types of asset classes, which also impact a lot of work on impact and ESG management and measurement. The Impact Framework is our most recent, let's say, method and process to assess impact and ESG in our portfolio, and it has been really the result of 2 years of really thorough work on ourselves. Actually, we have been doing impact and ESG analysis and measurement and management in the past. We had experience for more than 10 years, but we really came to a point where we realized we had lots of bits and pieces everywhere, and we needed to really stop a bit and rethink our process and kind of thinking in a more formalized way, in a more efficient way, and really kind of a cleanup exercise we did. So we started with a very actually strong support and guidance from our management, which helped a lot. We put together an impact steering committee in BlueOrchard, which was meeting regularly, and we really took our approach in impact and ESG from the start. So what we did, we said that, for example, and here the impact principle really played a very supportive role in really helping us thinking through this process. So one of the first thing we said is that we have to define for each strategy a clear impact intent, which really helps actually defining targets and objectives for the strategy during the lifetime. we have to define what is our contribution. So what's our additionality? What's BlueOrchard investment bringing in on the table that others are not, and how are we going to measure that? And then, of course, the aspect of verification, which was done, but really with the impact principle now is playing now a very important role, is the once we have all this measurement in place and we collect data, is going back to our initial intents and measure our progress towards that. This was really the overarching kind of, let's say, first steps that we kind of decided and agreed upon, and for every strategy we have in place. Then started the work on the tools, and this was really a very thorough work that we did. We had one tool previously that was measuring impact and ESG. And then we decided to split those. We decided to split those because we, as you say, we had to take into account material aspects that were different across all these asset classes and industries and impact teams. So what we created is an ESG scorecard, proprietary ESG scorecard that is actually done at company level, which means investee level. That is fed through a questionnaire, and this questionnaire is a set of very many questions that are different depending on which type of institution we assess. So we have a questionnaire for financial institutions that we have also a bit tweaked to capture, for example, information on NGOs or syndication, because these are different types of transactions. Then we have a set of questions for sustainable infrastructure or project finance, which is very much aligned to the performance standards for infrastructure. And then we have a questionnaire for insurance, which is very relevant for our climate finance strategies. The content of the questionnaire is really key to the success of the assessment, and it's aligned to the best practices currently available for the different industries we look at. Of course, this has to be complemented with an impact assessment, and this we perform through an impact scorecard. The impact scorecard is very much aligned to the 5 dimensions of the impact management project, which we believe is currently the best standard out there for impact management. And these dimensions are really done and filled at the investment level, which means that for one company, we can have more than one impact scorecard, because we can have, for example, a transaction in a financial inclusion strategy, but then we can also have something in insurance. So we'll do 2 different types of impact assessment, because of course the intent we have behind, the type of data we will collect, the risk we will face, this is all different. So we really have it at the impact at the investment level. And then those are really looked at at the investment committee together. They really are needed for each and every investment memo to be submitted. And the impact assessment also feeds into our SDG mapping or SDG contribution, because we believe that nowadays an impact framework to be strong, let's say, and to really provide the information needed, really has to act a bit like a prism, where we look at the same thing from different sides and we get different information. So in this case, we really look at the ESG of the transaction, we look at the impact, and then what we do, we don't only say strategically which ESG we contribute to, but we also back up this strategic claim with data, and this data has to come bottom up. This is something that also changed throughout the life of BlueOrchard. Initially, we had this SDG claim at the strategic level. Now, because we have these scorecards and because we have really qualitative data of quality coming into our system, we can back up this claim with proper data, which is really speaking better to investors also, and helping us also better talk about our strategy and be more concrete in the end of the day about our impact. One key feature also of our B Impact framework is really that we want it to be client-centric. This is a very important feature, because we believe that it doesn't really help to have too many data when we can't do much about it, and to have also good balance between qualitative and quantitative data to be able to process it and give a good picture to clients, but also to our investment companies or investees. What we have seen throughout this process is that investees are really ready to listen to what we tell them about the assessment. They're ready to work on their own companies to improve, because they really understand nowadays the importance of having a strong ESG and impact management system, also for themselves and for their own performance, and then of course also on the performance of our products. And maybe one last thing is the independency of our approval process. This is another key feature to make the whole framework more credible. So in our case, the scorecards are fed and kind of filled in directly from the companies. They are prepared by our investment team, but then the approval stays with a separate team so that we really keep it neutral and we make sure that in the end of the day, who decides whether a transaction is of high impact or has a low ESG risk is somebody that is not actually bringing the deal to a committee and doesn't have a conflict of interest. And I stop here and I give you back the word, Diane.
Thank you so much, Nadina. Now we turn to Kristin from Quona Capital. Now, Quona Capital's Access Quality Markets, or AQM impact framework, is the core of your impact management system, and it feeds into the impact assessment methodology. Now, you're a venture firm focused on fintech for inclusion in emerging markets. As Quona is a long-standing impact investor, it would be really interesting to hear your perspective on the key elements of an impact assessment framework, and what do you consider to be the most important?
Awesome. Thank you, Diane, and thank you so much for including us. Honored to be part of this panel. So, I mean, you already kind of briefly introduced Quona, but we are a venture firm focused on fintech for inclusion in emerging markets. We invest in leading companies that are reshaping financial services to meet the everyday needs of folks in Latin America, South and Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and MENA. We've made 40+ cumulative investments in those regions. I feel like we're kind of unique amongst the signatories to some extent, and amongst impact investors to some extent, in that we are fully focused on one impact thesis, which is financial inclusion, and therefore we are very, very thesis-driven around financial inclusion. And our framework, which, if Tanya, if you wouldn't mind sharing the screen there to demonstrate, our framework is reflects that focus. And I'll share a little bit of context to back up as to how we got to access quality markets. So Quona is currently a venture firm, but it originated as a pilot project within Axion, which is, for most of you who may or may not know it, the global nonprofit that has a pioneering legacy in microfinance and impact investing. And in 2015, while still a pilot within Axion, Quona's leaders worked with other industry leaders focused on financial services, though not impact investors. So they worked with folks like APIS and Anthemis to develop a financial inclusion framework that was relevant beyond the impact investing field. So the focus was on making sure there was an ability even beyond impact investors to communicate how impact was being driven and how they were reaching different segments. So access quality markets is very, very focused on financial inclusion, and it's based on the thesis that financial inclusion is not just about access or lack of access, it's about the quality of that access and the relevance of the services and goods that different companies or fintechs, which we invest in, are providing to their markets, as well as the market level or indirect impact of an investment over time. For example, we invest in companies that we believe that with significant scale and growth will be able to shape the ecosystem to be more client-centric, and that's part of our thesis. So our impact framework is reflective of that, and since 2015, we have been measuring impact across access quality markets. But that is a proprietary framework, and though we feel very confident in our ability to measure financial inclusion, we wanted to make sure that that was something that A, we were leading by example, and B, that it was translated to the broader impact investing industry. So our impact framework, which is access quality markets, is also explicitly aligned with the impact management project, which we also feel like is kind of best in class in the impact industry in terms of understanding impact objectives and different aspects of impact. And it's also aligned with target level indicators of the SDGs. So when we are communicating our impact both to our portfolio companies or potential investees and kind of the way that we view financial inclusion and impact, and to the external ecosystem, we are generally making sure to not only talk about our proprietary impact framework, but also include other elements of impact investing that we think are best in class. And I mean, Diane, I feel like the operating principles have been great voices in this field of communicating the need for standardization, or not standardization, but at least aligned upon frameworks, and Quona is a big proponent of that as well. And I did not know we were allowed to share more than one slide. So Tanya, if you want to stop sharing, I will share one additional slide to show you how we measure impact at the impact performance, which I think is equally as important as communicating impact. Let's see. Okay, can you all see my PowerPoint screen?
Yeah, we can see it, Kristin.
Okay, great. So beyond reporting on access quality markets, one of the things we actually learned, and I know we're going to touch on this later in the conversation, but one of the things that became apparent to us during the process for putting together our disclosure statement is while we felt that we were quite strong in a proprietary framework aligned with an impact thesis, is that we had room to grow around understanding impact performance. So our financial inclusion performance framework, which we had kind of been doing, but more informally, has now been formalized at Quona. And this is something that we are now have in place for the majority of our companies, and I'm continuing to roll it out as we invest. So it is a performance framework that is aligned with the impact management projects in impact classes, but with a specific focus on financial inclusion. So we're looking at companies and looking at both their direct impact. So within our framework, that's access and quality, as well as their market level impact, to understand if they are contributing to solutions, or where our thesis is, the majority of our companies are going to be around benefiting stakeholders at scale. But our thesis is that, as companies grow and scale, and as they, are able to more deeply impact their ecosystems, that they will be in that contributing to solutions bucket. So it's been a really, really interesting learning exercise for us. And we have learned a lot from this, and are committed to aligning with what we feel like are best practices within the industry in order to, set a good example for this field. I know you asked about, what we feel like are the most important pieces. And with a flood of impact investors in the space, we feel like we're trying to demonstrate that radical transparency is critical, which is why the operating principles is so important. Relevance to specific impact goals and theses, which a lot that my panelists have also talked about, and alignment with industry standards. So I don't want to be like a broken record here, but the more and more that signatories are able to demonstrate impact in a way that is understandable across the board, I think the stronger that argument is.
Well, thank you so much, Kristin, for rounding this out. All four of you emphasized that the need for transparency, and what the impact principles have allowed you to do through the disclosure statements is to really be transparent and detailed about what it takes to have a robust impact management system, and particularly around impact assessment. The two themes that came out a lot through all four of you is, one, the pre-investment process seems to be critical to the framework, because you have to set it up to make sure that you are putting forth the best investments possible, that you're going to be able to measure, monitor, and for impact, and work throughout the investment process to better the impact to the extent possible. The other is the engagement with stakeholders. And while that is not explicit in the impact principles, it is implied that engagement, being relevant and have that commitment to your stakeholders, is incredibly important. And we are hearing more and more from civil society that they want to hear more about that from impact investors. So with that, I really want to hear a discussion amongst the four of you, and reflections on what you hear from the other panelists. And if you could kind of weave in those two overarching themes that really came out, I'd love for you to do that. So anyone may start. I don't know, Marc, would you like to start the discussion?
Yes, I can definitely do that. Thanks, Diane. And I might actually want to start with the later aspect, stakeholder engagement. I think it's absolutely key. You're right. And obviously engaging with different stakeholders serves different purposes, right? It's not about just basically, validating impact and that actually the interventions and the solutions are actually working on the ground. So really, for example, collecting feedback from the beneficiaries. I think that's a key area of impact measurement, where actually around which already a very diverse ecosystem of also supportive functions and service providers evolved over the past years that you can rely on if you can't do those yourself. So that's definitely a key aspect for engaging stakeholders, but it's also about For example, what do your investors want? And if you serve a diverse group of investors, you have to align with their requirements on the assessment side, on the asset selection side that we just talked about, relating here to the pre-investment process and the importance of it. But also then obviously how do you kind of track that, how you work with companies to then basically put in place what you found during the assessment, and then also how to measure and how to report that. So I think it goes into various directions that just engagement with your stakeholders is absolutely key to develop and implement very robust impact assessment, and beyond that kind of measurement and management systems.
If I may add to that, I think that COVID has actually brought all of us a bit to that point where we understood that we needed to be there for the companies we had in our portfolio. So for us, it has been a great time actually in a crisis situation, a great time to actually sit down and take the time to raise awareness and actually do educational webinars and publication and everything to really help the institution understand how to cope with crisis, but then also how to improve their pre-crisis systems, so also on impact and ESG, to be able to face future situation that might arise in a better way. So also understanding how much ESG impact and risk and financial are all related, and they're all kind of going in a very similar direction. So this has also been a great period for stakeholder engagement on our end for our investment companies, but also then for our investors. They've been actually comforted by the fact that we were ready and we had the information needed to better cope with the situation and know what to do and how to, you know, communicate about it. So this has been also another great example, let's say, where this has come very much at hand.
I'll jump in as well, and I feel like I've been part of, and Quona has been part of a number of conversations within the industry about the importance of incorporating beneficiary level voices as well, and when we're talking about stakeholders. And one of the things that we actually just wrapped up was a pilot with 60 decibels, which is a lean data service focused on customer insights. And there are many other service providers out there, but I feel like 60 decibels is known by most folks who will be listening to this. And we just wrapped up this pilot with the intention of exploring how we do this at scale. And I think there's still a question there, but one of the things that we found is, we've been trying to figure out how to incorporate outcome level impact. We have plenty of outputs from our LP reporting. Our framework is built on mostly output level data, but what we heard from LPs, what we heard from the impact industry is that we need to focus on outcomes. That's a lot harder to do than it seems. So this is, you know, one of our first kind of forays into exploring that outcome level data. And what we found, which is great for us, is great alignment, you know, great proof of alignment between our thesis and output level data translating to the outcome level data. And not only that, but also a great value add to the companies that we were supporting through this pilot initiative. So we're really excited about the results of that and happy to talk about it with anyone that's listening. But incorporating that stakeholder level voices, I think, has only strengthened our impact framework to date.
Yeah, maybe if I can add a little bit to the points made, which were great. First, of course, as a multilateral development bank, we have a certain standards and imposed in terms of transparency, reporting on the stakeholders and the effects we have. Every year we have to report in terms of successful and unsuccessful operations. So it's something that you know, in a way, it's great to have this accountability framework that forces you really to also move towards a deeper management framework, because you need to manage this, not only report and say what's being successful or not, but also try to really to steer the organization towards success and impact. On the stakeholder part, a trend that we find extremely interesting, I think maybe what was mentioned before, is that we see more and more our clients, the investee, interested into measuring their own impact in the outcome they produce for the broader stakeholders. So we do see, we are the private sector part of the IDB, so we work in Latin America and the Caribbean, but we see a growing part of the private sector in Latin America moving towards this idea of a broader, more holistic view of a stakeholder approach, not only a shareholder approach. So they're much more interested to showing their results. They understand that it's something that not only to position their brand, but understand that it's a way to retain good talent as well. This is something we hear more and more. They need to show their impact. And so they come to us not only for investment, but more and more we see also for technical assistance. How do we do this? How do we measure? And of course, there are great resources out there in improving this, but we do see that trend too, that there is a greater interest into measuring impact on stakeholders, not only from impact investors, but also the clients and the private sector in general.
That's a very interesting point, and that just shows how the market is developing. Now that there's much more information out there, it's more accessible to even the investee companies. So I think this is a great discussion. I did want to ask Marc, and I think Nadina, you both mentioned about working in different asset classes, and Marc, you specifically said that over time it might have to be, your impact assessment may have to be tailored depending upon the sector, the geographies, the asset class that you're working with. And I've seen this in some of the disclosure statements for signatories that operate in different asset classes. They actually split their disclosure and they say, not all of the principles, but some of the principles, they say for this strategy, this is how it works. For this strategy, that's how it works. Now, standardization in impact investing is very difficult given the diversity. I mean, look at the four of you. Do you see this as maybe the way to have things more comparable across asset classes and strategies, or is this really going to depend upon the type of firm? I mean, you don't have the definitive answer, but it's interesting to see that there might be some customization needed, for each impact investor that's got a variety of impact investments.
Correct, and I would really largely agree with that. And I think generally I would argue that we've already reached a quite good level of standardization and visibility, and also guidance on best practices in impact assessment methodologies, for example, or approaches. And there is a wealth of kind of useful frameworks and initiatives, information and guidance out there that you can rely on. So the main challenge actually becomes more kind of orientation and find what you need actually, and for your specific context. And we all know that impact investors are very diverse. I mean, impact as an investment strategy is extremely diverse and can be applied in various forms and areas. So it's also always context specific. And while there is certainly potential to increase comparability, benchmarking, etc., of approaches and impact performance as well, which kind of the GIN launched a wealth of initiatives as well. There will always be, I think, a level, or there should always be a certain level of variation and differentiation to account for the specific context and nature of an investor and investments and the underlying companies, of course. That's at least our view as actually, in fact, a very diverse impact investor.
And I agree with Marc, but I think also that it's very important to have an overarching common approach. So I think the impact principles are a great, a great set of principles that are applicable to anyone. Doesn't matter in which industry, in which asset class you're active. There can be totally kind of taken over and applied to your business. And then I was actually very happy to see today that we all reference impact management project as one of the best practices. We use their language, which means that's a success. It means that different companies with different asset classes and different approach still saw in that framework a very helpful set of, again, principles or dimensions to follow and apply somehow conveniently to the business we run. So this is again another example of harmonization or standardization that 5 years ago even was not really happening in the same way. And then also I think what is playing a key role, at least in Europe today, and it's in our view, it's just a question of time that it becomes a global thing, is the regulatory push. And that's going to really change the rules of the game for everybody, where even the larger companies and institutions are going to be pushed to think about these things. And probably they will also they will have their own initiatives and sit around the same table and say, okay, if we now do it and we have to do it, let's do it in the same way, so we don't actually run into a wall in 5 years where we cannot talk the same language and we cannot go to clients and tell them about our strategy in a clear way. So the regulation, I think now it's really key to really move to the next level of impact.
And if I may, and if Kristin was trying to, maybe I would add something here. And I see this in different levels. First one, I think there is some low-hanging fruit in terms of harmonization that we really need to keep pushing to achieve. And that is what I say in a very banal way. We need to expand the coverage of the measuring the same thing the same way. These are all the initiatives we are taking, the joint impact indicator, the harmonization initiative on multilateral on how to measure output and outcomes, certain output and outcomes. Seems trivial, but that is something that needs to be we need to keep working on that and get much more continuous agreement on. We're measuring creation of jobs, we're measuring the way we measure impact on climate, that, you know, getting to having this measure harmonized and being everybody on the same page of something that is, if not harmonized, compatible in the way we measure things. The second thing, everybody mentioned the great impact that the impact management project in defining certain principle, what you want to see, the way you assess things, that is also extremely important. Your work with the operating principle for impact management is absolutely key. So all these initiatives are very important for the industry. The last point I think as a multilateral invest in many sectors, we had to go through this problem of harmonizing measurement for our own portfolio, because in a way we were challenged with the fact of having this trade-off between standardized measures and ad hoc measures, but also to wrap up everything into something that can be explained and seen as a whole and comparable, where comparability can be limited. So one thing I have a big sponsor of and really feel strong about is the movement towards monetization. This is why, in a way, we went towards the idea of economic and social rate of return, try to give a money value to the impact, because that in a way is something that we see internally helps us a lot to say, okay, these are the economic and social rate of return for the society of these investments. They are different, but in the end we have to kind of this common factor. We have a discussion on what went well, what went bad, what does it mean that something didn't go well, what is the return the society got out of this or didn't get out of this. So I understand this is complex. I understand cannot be done until we have measure of that, trying to monetize, give value. There's some great initiative like the Harvard Business School with the impact weighted account initiative that I think is helping in this direction. But I think that in a way we are a trend towards monetizing will help a lot. Comparability, it is challenging, it's difficult, but I think that I like to see the industry moving in that direction as well.
No, it's true. It's not standardization, but I think harmonization is what we've been using in the impact space. So the joint impact indicators, which if you're not aware of them, that was an initiative that there was a launch earlier this year, and information on that can also be found on the Impact Principles website. But that is at a high level to have some kind of harmonization across 4 sets of indicators across themes. So they started with gender, jobs, and climate, and they're going to be further developed and adding other themes to it. But that's so that, as Alessandro said, we will all speak the same language around some of the key indicators used in impact. And IMP is used by most of the private sector signatories. You're absolutely correct. Many use IRIS Plus as well. 60 decibels is a name that comes up quite a bit. So I think that rather than standardization, a lot of signatories are using similar tools so that there is more comparability, or at least consistency across the different types of impact investors, which is very important. So that's what we're striving for, is let's help the market develop best practices. Let's provide the tools that can be used by many impact investors. And the 4 of you today have done an incredible job at explaining how you go about impact assessment. And I think the slides that you've prepared have been very helpful. And I recommend everyone look at the full disclosure statements that are available on the website. So with that, I would like to ask each of you to just give us some closing remarks and reflections on the webinar and any advice you have for impact investors out there. And you can start in any order. We'll go in the same order. Marc, would you like to start?
Sure, thanks, Diane. No, we all, I think, agree here that impact assessment is really at the heart of impact investing and management overall, and because it forms an understanding and basis of many important activities that can be derived therefrom, and that's why it's critical to also get it right, and which can mean also slightly different approaches or models or methodologies for different players. And it's obviously hard to establish or to get it right overnight. It requires kind of a learning approach. It's a journey. I think we are a very vivid example of that. How we evolved our tools over more than a decade, and I think you have to embrace that journey and that process. And just maybe as a starting point, focus on the elementary parts of an impact assessment. E.g., just for example, just a list of the criteria that are relevant to you, and you can derive from the best practice guidance that we just mentioned, and keeping it pragmatic. I think what Alessandro mentioned as well, and efficient to serve the purpose, but also applying the needed creativity maybe to make sure you're doing it in the right way and the way that works for you and serves your purpose. I think that's important, just as general advice. And obviously, listen to guidance, seek guidance, and seek support from others. I think the willingness from the community, which really includes all of us here and all the signatories, I would argue, to share insights and learnings are clearly there and available, in my view.
Thank you, Alessandro.
Thank you. I would definitely echo Marc's point on the continuous improvement, and where that is also our experience. This is why the invitation to read our publication and learn a little bit more about the detail of how we do things is not only for you, it's also for us. So if you have any comments, feedback, that is great. I learn a lot from this kind of events and sharing initiative, sharing experience with others. So that helps a lot to improve what we do. So that definitely, if you embark in this process, it's going to be a continuous improvement process there for sure. The other thing that would give us an advice is that I totally agree with Marc to start from the basic you need. So I would say start small, but think big. Think in terms of what you will need in your, let's say, complete scenario, because something I saw as kind of failure when you start to say, okay, now I need this for the ex-ante assessment, I will be concerned about later about how to monitor things. Then you find out that you build something that is not really friendly to a monitoring system, the way you collect information from clients, and so forth. So think about why you start from what you need today. Also think about what would look like the complete framework that you think that your organization will eventually need to put in place, so that you, even if you don't implement immediately all the parts, at least you have an idea of what this part will need to be connected to in the future. And that I think is something that we personally in the past went through some challenges, and I think this time when we revamped the system, we got it right, because well, now we're not think everything together and implement over time. So that is definitely a suggestion I would give to everybody else. And again, thank you for the invitation to be here.
Thank you, Alessandro. Nadina?
Absolutely agreed with Alessandro and Marc, and I also think it's pretty clear to everybody now, any company, how important are impact and ESG. They can't be ignored anymore. They impact financial results as well, but they also have impacts, very long-term impacts on society and environment if they are not included in the investment strategy. So instead of just sitting and waiting for that impact to come, it's really important that the companies start to take these into strategic priorities and start to think through how to incorporate those in the assessment, because it might seem very complex and very difficult at the beginning, but really it's not. Today we have guiding principles and we have so many standards available that have been actually already undergoing several iterations to become better and more user-friendly, more clear, more simplified in a way, also to really put quality over quantity. So we really believe that it's a great time to start, because if not done so far, because there is so much at the moment available in terms of educational material, and again, also practitioner like us who have been doing that for so many years. We understand the importance of knowledge sharing, so we are also open to discussions with anyone who reach out. So it's really key, and events like these ones are really making the difference. They have made the difference in the past for us, and they will hopefully make the difference for newcomers today and so on moving forward. So it's great, and thanks again also for the opportunity, Diane.
Thank you, Nadina. And Kristin.
Yes, I would just echo what all my other panelists have said. I mean, I think when all of us were starting developing our impact frameworks, proprietary frameworks were the norm, and there are so many now existing and universally recognized best practices and frameworks. So the folks that are earlier on in their journey have a head start in terms of kind of understanding what a framework needs to encompass in the best practices. So I think that's great. We personally found, or we as Quona found, the disclosure statement process to be one of probably the most helpful processes and tools, and kind of a force function to stop and pause and reckon with what we're doing really well and where there's opportunities to improve when it comes to the industry in a way that we may not have done without this, initiative. So I would just encourage anyone that's, signing up to really use it as an opportunity rather than a check the box exercise. And as I think Quona is probably the smallest, both in terms of staff and AUM on this panel, but there's plenty of small signatories, and I think one of the things that we, as a very small firm and that is scrappy in every way, have learned is, amongst everything that we do, we need to be better about documenting, and I think that was one of the things that was most challenging about our disclosure statement process. So as newcomers are thinking about the disclosure statements, I would just make sure you have your ducks in a row, but also use it as a learning opportunity. And feel free to reach out if you're on the smaller side and want to kind of think about or talk through how smaller institutions have made this work.
Well, I want to thank all four of you for an incredible discussion. And I think this is just the beginning of really developing the best practices in impact assessment, because as we're seeing it develop, there are some best practices now, but as this market continues to grow, there's going to be some, pushing at the edges and refinement. So I look forward to continuing this discussion. And as all of you have said, this community is incredibly generous. So I would think all signatories are willing and able to talk to any impact investor about how to go about, becoming the investor that they want to be, and what should they incorporate in their impact management systems. And I'm very happy to hear that the disclosure statement process is being found to be very beneficial. It's not the first time that I've heard this. So I wish you all, thank you again, and I wish everyone a wonderful day. Thanks so much.